Welcome back to the Deeper Pulse and the Culture series. Before we get into today's content, a quick heads up for regular listeners of the pod. This week, I'm dropping another ebook over on Patreon, and this one's on the hot topic of vulnerability. It's just a few clicks away, along with over a dozen bonus episodes in the Deconstructing Dogma series, where friends, former colleagues, and I are healing out loud, getting into the nitty-gritty of everyday cult dynamics. In the coming weeks, I'm going to be inviting lots of new voices over onto Patreon to add to these bonus conversations, and I can't wait to share them with you. So if you want to learn more about how you can support this work and gain immediate access to bonus content, you can head over to patreon.com/The Deeper Pulse. Okay, onward. Before we get into today's conversation, a content warning. This episode includes reference to child abuse, coercion, and suicide. It may be triggering to trauma survivors or anyone who has experience with religious abuse or emotionally coercive relationships. Please listen with care. As always, the stories and opinions shared here are based on personal experience and are not intended to malign any group, individual, or organization. Last week, I featured a conversation with Lindsay Spiker. She shared her story, and she and I spoke about the dangers inherent in the so-called troubled teen industry. Today, we're going to keep our focus on how children are uniquely impacted by an unhealthy culture. Delinquent, troubled teen, problem child. When we use labels such as these to describe our children, we ourselves are under the influence. We are reinforcing a worldview that dehumanizes and separates. And I say this with compassion because oftentimes we use labels like this after having exhausted ourselves, trying to fix what appears to be broken. We try to help the child. We use tools and resources that are available to us, and when again and again they don't work, we are desperate to offload our helplessness. So we point at the child, wondering what on earth is wrong with him, her, them, rather than understanding that their behaviors are a symptom of the unwell cultures they occupy. Now, having said that, I want to be crystal fucking clear here. I have no interest in shaming parents, most of which are doing the best they can with the resources and ideologies that they have inherited. This isn't about pointing fingers at children or parents. I'm here to advocate for entire families and communities, for all of us who have been steeped in a hyper-individualistic, colonizing culture that teaches us to suck it up, power through, and turn our backs on those who do not conform. Children are in need of guidance, direction, and clear expressions of boundary. And they also need love, age-appropriate empathy, and adequate time and space to make mistakes, to grow and to develop according to their own unique timeline. Every child is unique, and therefore every parent will be challenged. Any child is harmed when they're born into a culty family, group, or system of influence where discipline is synonymous with control. And when a child who requires special considerations is born into a concretized belief system, a full-blown cult, the resulting trauma can be devastating. Children who are non-conforming or neurodivergent, from the perspective of cult leadership, they pose the greatest threat to the system as a whole. He, she, they must be broken, in every sense of the word. Their innate wildness must be systematically stripped from them, and the traumas that they experience as a result are lasting. In December of last year, I sat down with Trina Studebaker to talk about her experiences as a leader, wife, and mother in a Christian fundamentalist cult. In episode 42, Trina spoke bravely about how she regrets that due to cultic indoctrination, she was unable to protect her children from a culture that was highly toxic and physically and emotionally abusive. During our conversations, she spoke openly about the harm and terror that her children experienced. And she shared a fair bit about her eldest son, Christian, a neurodivergent child whose very birth challenged the family order to such a degree that he became a constant scapegoat for his father's pain and anger. She spoke about how the religious dogma of the group was used to justify extreme physical and emotional abuse. And she offered the details of her story not as trauma porn, but as a cautionary tale for any parent who places ideology above the needs of their children. It was a brave and powerful episode, and I do recommend you circle back if you haven't heard it. Trina and I kept in close contact after it aired, and about a week after the episode dropped, she reached out to me wondering if I would be open to hearing from her now grown son, Christian. Of course, I said yes, and he and I connected soon after. We talked for over an hour, and it became immediately apparent that this follow-up episode had to happen. First and foremost, because Christian has every right to speak for himself. And I just want to take a second to celebrate here that his mama gets that. She understands that his life is his own. And so he joins us today with Trina's brave and wholehearted blessing. And secondly, what an honor and an opportunity for us all to see the cult through a young child's perspective. Christian was born into the group, as was his father before him. Which is part of what makes this story so damn powerful, because both of these men are no longer who they once were. Which is really why Christian wanted to be here today, to do as children are meant to do, to carry forward the legacy and evolve the narrative from one of resiliency to one of recovery. Now, this is an honest and at times painful story to hear, and that's why it's important for us to listen and to hang on till the end, because it is also a story of reconciliation and repair. Christian is here because he wants us all to know that not only is it possible to survive the cultiest bullshit imaginable, it is also possible to heal, to reimagine, and to thrive on the other side of it all. Thanks for tuning in. Here's my conversation with Trina Studebaker. So how are you feeling going into this conversation?
For the most part, pretty good. Definitely had a little bit of a wave of anxiety like 30 minutes ago, but I think that's normal. Even with how many times I've talked about stuff, you always get that initial rush, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've done this before. So never been recorded, but yeah.
Well, I'm so honored that you are allowing me to push the record button with you and that you're trusting me with your story. And I'd love to just start with how we connected to one another. And as I mentioned, your mom, Trina, was on the podcast in late December, episode number 42. And she told her story about really about resiliency and surviving Christian fundamentalist cult that your whole family was a part of. And she shared about what it was like to be a mother, and in turn spoke a little bit about your family and spoke specifically about you and some of the experiences you had. And I think that it makes perfect sense that you would want an opportunity to speak for yourself. And I'm curious, though, what was that experience like, having your mother tell that story publicly?
I mean, I'm pretty familiar with it. She's been pretty outspoken through her own channels, in different forms of social media and through friends and things like that. So we've had to have that kind of conversation before of like what is okay to share with other people. Because originally, when we initiated this whole recovery journey, I guess you could call it, she was very similar to me, having suppressed everything and then all of a sudden being comfortable or being willing to share these things. You kind of go a little bit overboard. And anyway, initially there was oversharing being done, not just for our own stories, but about each other and other members of the family. We had to have that kind of conversation of what is okay. But that's all part of the journey. It's a process and establishing boundaries, and we're really good about that now. But it is a familiar thing for at least she and I in the family to share these stories. So it was really cool to kind of hear some minor things that I'd forgotten about and a few things that were new. But it is always really interesting to hear somebody else's perspective of your own life to a certain extent, a slice of it.
Yeah, definitely. And so you obviously listened to the episode, and as I understand it, you actually shared it. You felt comfortable sharing it with folks.
Yeah.
And then you reached out to her to maybe make a connection with me. Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to do that.
I think in the grand, I mean, I understood the idea, behind the whole podcast series, sharing the message of all of these different people's stories and everything. And I thought it might be an interesting thing to have, an individual's perspective as a parent, and then also to get the child's perspective of things. And and you and I have, in our previous conversation, we talked about how you haven't had anybody on the podcast yet of somebody who was born into the cult. A lot
Hmm.
of people were found it. I think we had talked about usually around the 20s and 30s years of age. And so it's a
Hmm.
little bit different, I think, of an experience when you're born into it and that's all you know. And
Yes.
that's what your whole
Yes.
life is, that's what you're introduced to.
Well, you were spot on. I was, of course, thrilled to connect with you, just theoretically to connect with you because of that different perspective that you have. And then when we actually connected to actually hear your story, and really the way that I framed it toward the end of our conversation that feels important for the listeners is really that bridge from resiliency to recovery. I feel like your life is such a testament to that. And I was so touched hearing your story. And so I hope you don't mind repeating yourself and sharing with our listeners what that journey's been like, and starting from the beginning, since they were already dropped into your story when you were a small child in the cult. Like,
Right.
tell us a little bit about you as a child and the life that you lived.
Oh man. Yeah. It's an odd thing to be so vastly separated from that experience, not just in years, but in just status of life and everything that's happened since my childhood and everything that I've grown into, things I've experienced. It's almost like telling somebody else's story, until you get to some of those,
Mm,
heavy, sweet spots and the emotions kind of come back to a certain extent. But it is very similar to my relationship with my dad, where he is a different person now than he was, as people heard on my mom's podcast, and that I'll go into detail. I very much tell people that the person that he is today is a different person than the dad that I knew back in my
mhm.
childhood. And the same goes for me. I'm a completely different person than I was. And so it is very odd to kind of look back and think about and remember these things that have happened and just be so completely separated from that none of that being my reality now. Um,
Right.
um, is yeah, it's really interesting. I guess where you said to start at the beginning. My mom told me later on that as early as around 6 months of age, she could tell that I was different. I was not like the other babies. She didn't know what it was that was off, but something wasn't right. It wasn't normal, I guess you could say. And later found out, I think around the age of 8, when I was officially diagnosed diagnosed just like every other 90s kid with ADHD, anxiety, and depression, which I was, medicated for. And it was, in my situation, was not an overdiagnosis. It wasn't just a blanket, like this kid has anger issues or this kid can't sit still, therefore ADHD. It's like, no, I was very much the textbook definition of ADHD. And so in addition to ADHD, anxiety, and depression, I was also diagnosed with Tourette's, OCD, ODD, which is oppositional defiance disorder, CD, which is conflict disorder. I was never diagnosed with schizophrenia because that's kind of the interesting thing about being crazy is you don't know you're crazy, and I didn't know that the voices that I was hearing were not normal. So
Mm,
I never told anybody about that until I was in my 20s. And so, as a kid who was diagnosed with all of these different problems and had all these behavioral problems, I don't know what the correct course of action is to raise a child like that. I hope that I never have a kid like me. I was more than one handful. I had all of these different problems and stuff and would get into trouble. And so my early life was, I guess, what I was really aware of was that I was born into a family and not everybody loved me. I could sense that. I could sense, and I was so young, I didn't realize what it was, but my mom loved me, but my dad didn't. He didn't want me. And then being in the cult where that kind of foundation is set, I explain it to people that they believed and they taught the adults and the parents that if your child was acting out, it's because the child had demons inside and they needed to be expelled. And the best way to do that would be to beat your child. And a sign that you were doing it right is if there was blood. If there's blood, that's physical proof that the demons are leaving your body. And so that was my reality as this confused, angry, lost child who had no control over, myself. I would do things with my body, especially with the Tourette's, that I had no control over, and kind of explain Tourette's as being similar to a seizure rather than, one or two episodes a day that last X amount of time. It's more of like 100,000 seizures that last a second each one. And so my early life was just full of so much confusion and anger and desperation to be accepted. And then when I would not get the acceptance from my dad or from teachers or from my classmates or anybody, that would just fuel the anger even more. And I would lash out and I would break things. I would fight, cause problems for people. And then I would be disciplined again. And disciplined in quotation marks. I talk about how when I say that I was disciplined as a child, a lot of people are like, yeah, I was spanked too. And I'm like, yeah, were any tools used on you? Was a belt? I remember my dad at the time, he was never physically abusive to the point that it would break things. None of my bones were ever broken, but he did the psychological, the mental kind of torture where he would put me in timeout right by the garage door and he'd tell me to stand there and listen. And he'd go out in the garage and he'd say, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to make something to beat you with. And I would have to stand there by the garage door anticipating when he would come back in. And he would spend however long it was in the garage making all this noise, building something that he was going to use on me. And so there was a lot of that kind of fear instilled in me at such a young age. And in a conversation I had with my grandpa, my mom's dad, who I'm extremely close to, and has very much been my hero throughout my life. He had told me that he remembered as early as, I think, 2.5 when we were at their house and I had gotten a hold of a marker or something and snuck behind their recliner in the living room and like drew on the back of the recliner as a 2-year-old. And my dad was outraged that I had destroyed something of somebody else's and of value. And to my grandparents, it wasn't a big deal. It's the back of the recliner. It's a 2-year-old.
That's what 2-year-olds do. Yeah.
Yeah. And my dad then picked me up and took me into the back room and beat me as a 2-year-old. And I think that's around, from what I remember talking to my mom, around that time, between the ages of 1 and 2 is when the physical abuse started happening. And it wasn't spankings, and also why would you spank a 1 or 2-year-old? Like they're so young, they're not going to understand. But the way that my dad had learned was that that's how you discipline a child who's acting out. And I wonder how much of what I did was actually acting out and how much of it was just a normal 1 or 2-year-old,
Exactly. Right.
So my early years were, the emotional kind of feelings and thoughts were, why don't you love me? What is so inherently wrong with me that I'm unlovable by you? Thinking of my dad and that desperation for love, safety, compassion, things like that. And that trend just continued. It compounded over time and got worse and worse. My behavioral issues got worse and worse. I was a problem at school. very violent. A lot of the kids were the same size as me. We're all right around the same size when you're 5 or 6 years old. And I remember I was suspended in first grade because some kid in gym class took my favorite jump rope and he wouldn't give it to me. And so I grabbed another jump rope and came up behind him and wrapped it around his neck and pulled him down to the ground and started strangling him. That was my understanding of how to deal with emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that continued on. I was very much a problem child and I was a danger to other children. Third grade, I remember there was a kid who we were sitting across from each other at these desks and he had made a joke about me. I was the butt of the joke, basically. And I jumped across the table and held a pair of scissors to his throat and threatened to kill him if he ever made a joke about me again. Completely normal behavior for an 8-year-old to go, to do. No problems there whatsoever. No red flags. God knows how many conversations my parents had, or my mom specifically had to have with the teachers and the school administration about me. But it's funny. I wonder if any of the teachers or anybody had any kind of sense to ask what's going on at home.
Yes, that's exactly what I keep thinking, right? Yeah.
And they may have, but as my mom shared in her story, how they were taught or told to parent, they were told that nobody's going to understand why we're doing this. We're being of service to God,
Yeah.
and this is the way God
Yeah.
wants it, and that whole load of garbage. And
Yeah. You can curse on here, just so
yeah,
you
I'm just
know.
looking for more creative words.
Okay.
Yeah, that load of shit.
Well, and the nature of the larger culture and how we enable cult dynamics through this whole idea of religious freedom, right? Oh, well, it's part of their religion, so we can't interfere, we can't ask questions, we can't pursue it any further because this is a function of their religious beliefs, and it's their right to essentially abuse their
Right.
children because religious freedom,
Right.
right?
Well, and then at the
Yeah.
same time, I think it was around the ages of 6 or 7 that, my parents were like, we can't handle this kid. We're overwhelmed. And they
Mhm.
sought out help through other means. I started going to therapy, different types of counselors and things like that. And looking back, I'm just like, how could you all be such idiots to, not question why is he acting out this way? And
Yes.
then be
Yes.
like, oh, the appropriate response is then to have them go to therapy and again be like, we don't know what's wrong with him. It's like, well, maybe if you loved him and weren't beating him and putting him through these different things,
Uh-huh.
maybe then the child would act somewhat normally. The neurological things were present still and were a very big thing.
Sure.
But I wonder again, the extent that they were is probably amplified by what was going on at home.
100% had to be.
Yeah. And it just kept getting worse and worse. I was medicated at 8, I think was when I started being medicated after the diagnoses. And that was when it was like being a subject, an experiment is what it felt like. My parents tried to explain to me why I did these things, why I acted this way. And they said that the wires in your head are just mixed up. They're not connecting where they're supposed to be, which is a fairly adequate explanation coming from where they were being uneducated on the matter. And
Sure.
my mom never said that it's because God hates you, but that's something that my dad would say. You are this
Mm.
way because you're bad, you're evil, or whatever. That's why I don't love you. There are many different reasons why he didn't love me. So then you take this 8-year-old and you start giving them pills, and it was just such an experiment. It was like we'd go to these weekly or bi-weekly meetings with the therapists and the counselors trying to figure out the right balance. Oh, this new drug came out and we should try this one. And really it stunted my physical growth because a common side effect of a lot of these different medications, they serve as appetite suppressants to a certain degree. And so as this kid who's growing and getting closer and closer to becoming a teenager and going through that big growth spurt, my weight was severely stunted. I would have been classified as anorexic at certain points. That the doctors then had to prescribe Pediasure and different types of weight gain supplements and things like that to try to, so it was just this whole situation where there's this kid who's not loved, who's getting beaten, giving these medications, and then going to counseling and therapy, and then given specialized food and all this stuff. And I felt very special and unique and different from everybody else. And that was really like where those feelings, I'm alone in this, nobody understands. And that feeling of wanting to be loved, gets translated over time to fuck everybody else. I hate you because you don't accept me. And things would get worse at school. I started to become a scrawny kid who was smaller than everybody else, even a lot of the girls, and would get bullied. And then I would act out, what I felt like was appropriately. And then I'd get in trouble and suspended. And then I'd go home and I'd get in trouble and disciplined for being suspended. And then I would act out even more.
Just a cycle. Yeah.
It was just this endless cycle. And at some point, I think I just accepted that this was my reality. This was the way that my life was going to be forever. And there was nothing I could do about it. And my dad definitely helped. He assisted in that process. My brother is incredibly intelligent, and my dad would tell me, I would pick on my brother. I never did things to him that my dad did to me, to the same extent. I would do the typical, punching and fighting like kids do. And I probably, definitely went to a higher level with him than a normal kid would. But it wasn't the same as what my dad put me through. I wasn't using tools on my brother or locking him in rooms and closets and things like that. But my dad would tell me that I needed to be nice to my brother because when I was older, he was going to be the one to bail me out of jail. Because God knows I'm not. As soon as you're 18, I'm fucking done with you. You're on your own, kid. And, and he would say things like that at 9, 10 years old. So I'm in this situation where I'm not loved by one of my parents. This person also abuses me and tortures me to a certain extent. And I'm having all these different problems, and I'm just so scared and lost and confused and just, insurmountably angry. And angry isn't even the right word. Rageful, just, to such a high extent, I've never seen anybody else demonstrate the level. I would almost pop the blood vessels in my eyes from just screaming and being so angry as a child. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And the cult that was the reality. It was, it was confusing because I actually early on liked going to this place because all of my family was there. My cousins in particular, on my dad's side, his oldest sister's 4 daughters were there, and my aunt and uncle, and basically my whole dad's side of the family was there, and they were family, and we were close because we were, participating in these different activities 4 or 5 days a week. So I liked it. I didn't make the connections between the abuse and this cult. And to me, it wasn't a cult. You're normal, sane people don't enter into those kind of atmospheres, and they don't have those kind of thoughts of like, yeah, this is right or this is wrong. Like I said before, crazy people don't know they're crazy. Broken people don't know they're broken.
And people don't join cults. They join a good thing.
Right. And, I remember a lot of the different teachings and things that we were taught through the cult. Major one to me was that God has an ultimate plan, and everything that happens to you there's a reason for it. And so my dad would then take that and the abuse and all the different things like that, it was because God was punishing me. And my relationship with God from that point on was that, of course, there are no other gods. This is the only one right, true God. Jesus was white. God is a old white man in the sky with a white beard and a staff. And the bad things were happening to me because God hates me or because God is punishing me. And I will never be good enough to get into heaven, but I have to spend the rest of my life serving God. That was the kind of idea that they had instilled in me.
So, what sort of future, if any, could you see for yourself with this framework?
I didn't think of the future. I mean, I accepted that I was going to end up in jail, that I would, as my dad said, I would be homeless or in jail or dead. And that was my reality. And school was never for me. I was always getting into trouble, and nobody in my family had ever done anything. I think my mom said she went for like one semester to a community college, and same with my dad. But that was the most that anybody in my family had ever done. And school was for my brother. He was the gifted intellectual in the family who would get straight A's, and he was the star student for all of his classes. And I was so jealous of the praise he would receive from our parents and from the teachers. I hated it because I was uncontrollable. I had no idea what was going on with me, and I would act out in these different ways. And he was the perfect child. He had friends, and I had none. I would oftentimes the older brother would tag along with the younger brother to hang out with his friends because I was a problem child, and all the neighborhood families knew that. They were all scared of me, and they didn't want their kids around me. So my interaction with other people my age they would bully me at school, and then I would go and hang out with the younger kids that were my brother's friends if their families would allow me. So I had really accepted this whole reality that Austin, my brother, was going to be successful, and he was going to have to take care of me as an adult. And that was all the thought I gave it. There were no dreams or any kind of sparkly future for me. Well, when I was 10, I picked on a kid in class, and I got into a lot of trouble for it. I had already been suspended who knows how many times that year. My parents couldn't take any more time off of work, because my mom was working at the time, and so was my dad. And so they came up with a deal with the school district where one of my parents would drive me to school, and the vice principal and a teacher would come out to the car and physically escort me into the building. And they had cleared out this storage room in the gym that was about a 6x8 room. It was just storage for different things like desks and stuff. And they cleared it out, and they would put me in there and then lock it. And I would be in there all day by myself. I remember there was one poster, a Michael Jordan poster. He's holding up a TV character's Urkel. He was picking up Urkel by his head. And that was all that I had in the room. I had a desk and then that, and then homework. And at lunchtime, a teacher would come out and escort me to the cafeteria where I was by myself on a table with a teacher. And I would sit there, and it was very much like prison. And then afterwards, escorted back to the room and locked in there, and then repeat the process for the last 2 weeks of my 5th grade year. And it was solitary confinement as a 10-year-old. And I was in trouble. So once I got home, I was locked in my room, and would be disciplined and things like that. So that's just what reality was. I accepted it. That was what my future was going to be. And eventually, that year when I was 10 was when we left the cult. And my parents kind of they didn't explain it very well, but they explained it to my brother and I that we were leaving, and there was going to be this big change, and we didn't know what all was going to happen, but we were leaving. And again, I didn't connect the dots between the cult and the abuse. But I was scared because my entire family was there, everybody that I knew. And it was kind of these weird realizations of like talking to other kids, and they would be like, oh, this weekend we're going doing this or that with our families. And I'm just confused. Like, what do you mean? You don't have practice, like worship practice? You don't have Bible study? You don't have this or that going on that was dedicating your life to God? Like, so everybody else was wrong. We were right. And that was that.
Did that add to the sense of isolation, I would imagine, with your peers?
Yeah, I mean, already we were told that we were special and better than everybody else because we were serving the right God, and other people, the heathens, they were not serving the right God or any God. And we were the only ones who were going to be in heaven.
So when you left, then the foundation of your belief system is the only thing you'd ever known. So we're going to leave this group that is the way, the path, the only people serving the right God. And now we're going to transition into something else. Like, did you have anxiety around that, or was that not really consciously on your radar at the time?
I don't think it was really on my radar. I was a child and things happened to me. My dad would do what he did and this and that. I was always along for the ride. And so it was like, okay, this is a change. It's happening. I didn't give it any thought, but I'm sure I had anxiety around it. My brother was always the more aware, and questioning, at least internally, those sorts of things. I think he came to the conclusion, or his own conclusion, that there was no God at a far younger age than I did, where he started having those questions of, like, that doesn't make sense. If, these children, these starving children in Africa that are dying by the millions, why does God hate them if they don't even know he exists? The logic wasn't there, and he would piece those things together before I did. I was too focused on my own reality. I was just in adapt mode, doing the best I could with what I had been given, what very little I had been given, and what little control I had. But then we kind of jumped around to a few different churches and different establishments after we left the cult. None of it was for very long. My parents had some pretty eye-opening experiences around politics around this time when they had found a church that the leader of the church was a Democrat. What do you mean? What do you mean you believe in God and you're serving the right God and you're a Democrat? That's not right. No pun intended.
No pun intended.
And so they had their own experiences. I was not aware of politics. I'm 10, 11, 12 years old, just not aware of any of that kind of stuff. I was just, head down and try to survive. There was this like internal void that started with not being loved by my dad, and then that grew, every time something happened or throughout all the years, that the void would grow, and it would get larger and larger until it's this gaping chasm of emptiness on the inside. And I was so desperate to fill it with something. I mean, with compassion, with love. And my mom did the absolute best that she could with what she had been given and what she had learned. And it wasn't enough. She can't make up for another parent essentially not being there while being there and being abusive. And my relationship with my dad was, I think, at the worst it had ever been. We would all go to bed around 8 or 9, or the kids would go to bed around 8, and parents would go to bed around 9 or 10. And around 11 at night, my dad would go into the kitchen and he'd get a glass of water. And I hated him so much because he was just pure evil in my eyes, in my opinion. He was the reason for everything that was wrong in the world, and especially everything that was wrong in my world. And I had planned out how I was going to kill him. I was going to hide in the kitchen and have a knife and come up behind him and kill him. What sane, normal child has those kinds of thoughts? And I knew that I would probably end up in juvenile detention and I would get in trouble for that. And I didn't do it because I was afraid of getting in trouble with the law. I never did it because I was afraid that I would fail and that he would then kill me. Eventually, when I was a teenager, I had a friend, my first real friend, who accepted me, how I acted. He was also a problem child. He had run-ins with the law and stuff, and those were the people I identified with, was other problem kids. And it's funny because my parents didn't want me around them in fear that they would rub off on me and make me act out more.
Right.
But really, I just wanted to be accepted and have some companionship.
That's where you got a sense of belonging.
Yeah. And this one friend, I think I was 16. We had been friends for a few years. My oldest friend at that time, I had never had a real true friend that I could be myself with and that would engage in the inappropriate behaviors that I participated in, like throwing rocks, not little rocks, throwing, big rocks at cars, breaking windows, breaking into houses, doing things, violent, aggressive, and angry things because of how angry I was at the world. And this person I trusted, actually, and he introduced me to marijuana. And he was like, hey, here's this thing. And I was very much a dare kid. I was all about dare and drugs are bad and all that stuff.
All the more reason to do them because you're bad. Like, that's your worldview. Like, I'm bad, so the bad thing must be for me.
Yeah. And I liked those visualizations of what were bad things. Motorcycles, leather jackets, tattoos, smoking, all that kind of stuff that, the antagonist in the different films and TV shows. Like I loved that. I remember as a kid, my parents wouldn't even let us watch Lion King. And we were a Disney only household because that was the only thing that was somewhat okay. But I couldn't watch Lion King because I would imitate Scar. I didn't want to be Mufasa, the leader, or whatever. I wanted to be the bad one. I wanted to be angry and lash out. But this friend had also experienced his own form of abuse, and we never talked about it. But I realize now, why those kinds of people find each other, how we find each other.
Yeah.
And I trusted him. And so when he said, pot is not going to kill you, I tried it out. And the very first time I did, that gaping chasm inside was filled immediately. Everything that was wrong in my world, in my life, in that reality was righted. I felt normal. I felt like I could have friends. I felt like I could fit in with the world. And as a teenager, I mean, most importantly, I could talk to girls finally. I mean, a 16-year-old boy, drug fueled. Yeah, it was amazing. And I remember my first thought after the effects hit me was, I want to feel this way and do this every day for the rest of my life. And that was kind of what I accepted. That was what was going to happen. I was going to pursue that with the desperation of a drowning man, because everything that was wrong with my life and I had no idea how to fix it, all of a sudden I had a fix. I had the fix. And it progressed from there. Pot turned into this, which turned into that. And 6 months after I first smoked pot, I was doing heroin in this guy's car outside of an outpatient rehab center that I was in, because my mom was disabled at the time and had tons of Oxycontin. She had tons of pain pills. And she was so high and doped up on the stuff to deal with her chronic pain that there was no way she was as good and organized as she is. There was no way she was keeping track of all the pills. And so I started taking them. And at the beginning, I would take them and I would sell them to buy more pot. But pot stopped working. It stopped getting me as high. And so my friend would be like, hey, take some of these pills, you'll feel better. So we started. And then I started taking more pills and more until my mom would refill the prescription. And then the next day, the bottle would be empty. And they naturally asked me what was going on. And I lied, of course, as I did about everything. And eventually the truth came out after them pressing me quite hard. And I should also mention that the abuse with my dad, the physical abuse, stopped when I was 14. And I've
Hmm.
had conversations with him. He doesn't know why that was when he stopped. I don't know why either. But the interesting thing is that my brother can't remember his childhood. It was so traumatic having to be there and watch my dad do what he did to me, and to be present in this environment of anxiety and of conflict. He told me one day, he said, I can't remember anything before the age of 11. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to figure out, why is that? He's 3 years younger than me. So when he was 11, I was 14, and that was when the abuse stopped. At that moment,
Ah,
his life began, essentially, from what he
right,
can remember.
right.
And for me, that was when it all stopped. I never got the chance to fight my dad. I know a lot of kids that their dad would hit them or things like that, and I asked them, when did it stop? They said, when I knocked him on his ass.
That was my first thought when you said that it stopped at 14. I was like, oh, you must have fought back and that ended it all. But no, that's not what happened.
No, the worst thing possible, which was that it just stopped. Just And I never
Huh.
got that chance. I never got the chance to become a man, quotation marks, and fight back.
Were you hypervigilant during those late teen years, waiting for it to start up again? Or what was your thinking around that?
I think it tapered off to a certain degree. So I think in the back of my mind, yeah, was kind of like waiting for it, but I wasn't ready to fight back because he had instilled in me so much fear of death that, I was just happy that it
Yeah.
ended. Looking back now, I kind of wish the circumstances had been different, but I never got the chance to fight back or gain some level of confidence, I guess you could say, or take back my life, essentially. That kind of rite of passage, I guess you could call it, for what a lot of these people that experience this go through. It's not really that important now. Yeah, I was doing drugs in an outpatient rehab center. This was my senior year of high school when I was 17. And one thing led to another. I kept failing UAs. I would have my brother pee in a cup for me because I knew that I had a drug testing after school. My reality was I'd go to school, Monday through Friday. And on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays after school, I would take the bus and I would go to this outpatient rehab. And then afterwards, I'd go home and I'd have to be just at home. Brother peed in a cup. I would keep it on me all day throughout the school day, knowing, I was smarter than everybody. I could outsmart the system. I remember when I was a little kid, I would be obsessive about ice cream and I would eat all of the ice cream. So they would go, they'd put the ice cream in the freezer and I'd sneak in at night out into the kitchen and eat all the ice cream and then put the empty container in the freezer because I didn't want them to find out. Because, they wouldn't find out they wouldn't find out about an empty container or anything.
Brilliant plan.
Brilliant, well executed. And they started hiding it in like frozen pea bags and stuff. And I would always find it. Eventually they bought a second freezer they put out in the garage and my dad put a padlock on it. He retrofitted it with this lock. And when they did that and I knew that they had ice cream, my dad was kind of like, you want to be all defiant and play games? Well, beat that essentially. And me being like, oh, okay, you want to fight? Let's fight then. So I
Right.
wait till they go leave the house or go to sleep or whatever. And I took the freezer apart. I left the part that was locked. I took the entire freezer
Wow.
apart, got the ice cream out, ate it all, put it back in the freezer in an empty container, and then put the freezer back together. And
How old were you when you did
I was
that?
probably 12 or 13, maybe
Oh
younger
my
than that.
gosh. You, my friend, are untamable, which is a beautiful thing, and in the situation that you were in was a dangerous thing to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kept failing the UAs. My grandfather, who is a member of AA as well, he got sober in 1970. He now has almost 53 years sober. He was such a big influence on me in my life, and especially my recovery from drug addictions. And the outpatient rehab told my parents if he fails another UA, he's going to be sent to rehab. My parents brought that up to my grandfather, who said, give him the choice to go. And I had this sort of a white light experience when I was being forced to attend these AA meetings, where I saw a future version of me that was homeless and using drugs and alone. And then I saw a future me that was healthy, had friends and family, and looked happy. And that scared me. So I texted my mom I needed help. And a week later, I was in Minnesota for a month. And I thought, 1 month away from everybody, that sounds great. It'd be a cool adventure. Great story. Brings all the focus on me when I come back. Like, I'll get all the attention from everybody because I've been gone and nobody knew where I was. And, I disappeared and then reemerged. And I didn't have a problem. I hadn't been using drugs that long, so it wasn't that big of a problem. The licensed and well-educated professionals thought differently, and recommended me for extended care. So that 1 month turned into 4 months. And I spent, after the 1 month in Minnesota, 3 months in Pennsylvania at a different rehab facility. I mean, I loved rehab. All of a sudden I had structure and I didn't have to think. I didn't have to figure things out anymore. It was all figured out already for me. So I could be free. And it was very much one of the happiest times of my life, and also one of the saddest. And I was introduced to AA. And for the first time in my life, I saw people who were just like me, who didn't need to do the things that I was doing, who didn't feel the way that I felt at that moment, but had felt that way before. And they had a solution that was not drugs or alcohol. And it piqued my curiosity. And I thought, maybe it would work for me. If it works for them, maybe it would. And so I went into it and I did the whole 12-step thing, sponsor steps, and it worked. I didn't need drugs anymore. I started to learn how to behave normally. And I should also mention that around my teenage years was when a lot of my behavioral and neurological things started to fall by the wayside and started to go away.
Was it around the age of 14 by chance?
Well, part of it probably has to do with that, but ultimately it was something else, actually. How I just started to, these things started to go away. I stopped hearing voices and I was able to sit in a chair and not fidget and squirm and do all that kind of stuff. I wasn't obsessed with different things. I didn't have to tap something 4 times, or I didn't have to do this and that anymore. It just started to taper off and go away. It was the first time that I started to do therapy, and I wanted it. And I thought that it might work. Because all the therapy that I went through as a kid, I wasn't aware that things were wrong. I was there because I was a bad child and there was nothing they could do to fix me. So,
right.
So it was like my first real case of really looking inward and looking at the things that were going on. And I now, in November, celebrated 14 years clean and sober. As a senior in high school, 17 years old, that was the last time that I ever did any drugs or drank any alcohol. And it's a bit of a faux pas to be in AA or any kind of 12-step program and say, like, I'm never going to do this again. I'm never going to do that stuff, because I refuse to go back to that gym storage room. I refuse to go back to being alone and angry at everybody. And I refuse to go back to being unlovable, is my whole sentiment. So I was told to do things a certain way, so I did them, and they worked. And then I got the opportunity through other means, other forms of therapy, start to look at that childhood stuff. AA had a big focus on the drugs and alcohol and why do we do those things. But it wasn't until my 20s that I really started to not look inward, but go inward. AA gave me the tools necessary to look inward and be able to correct my behaviors and try to act appropriately from that point on. But the other forms of therapy allowed me to go back inside and start to address the things that were broken. When I came back from rehab, I met the first group of friends, real friends who weren't using me for drugs or alcohol or whatever I could give them, but just wanted to be around me. They were the first ones that I ever had in my life. I had, 17 years without friends to make up for. So I worked at part-time jobs just to pay the bills and stuff. I worked at all these different jobs like Safeway. I was a bag boy. I did all these dead-end jobs. And I was so confused because I knew I was smart. I can do more than this. But there was so much fear of failure, of not being good enough. That was the big, deep thing, was just the fear of not being enough. And through different circumstances, ended up going to Portland Community College. I needed the money, essentially. I was in a situation where money was being taken out of my paycheck, and I was desperate. I didn't have enough experience or education or skills to be able to make enough money to survive. And so I talked to different people, like my mentor, my sponsor, and friends and family. And my sponsor at the time had told me that if I go to college, I can get financial aid, and the government can't take that money. So I initially went to community college so that I could take out the full amount of the loans so I could afford to live, pay my bills, have fun, do all that kind of stuff. And I did the bare minimum. I started to learn a little bit, but I didn't know how to be a good student. I just showed up, paid attention in class, did the assignments and all that kind of stuff. But then the classes got harder, and I wasn't able to just get by with my smarts just by paying attention in class. It required studying, and I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know what studying meant. What do you do for studying? Do you just read the content again? Like, I didn't know what, my parents were so busy with trying to keep me out of jail as a kid that I never learned how to be a good student. They never taught me this is what studying is. And my grades started slipping, and I would lose my scholarship. And that meant I would be homeless and I would die. Everything was, you will die. So that was the catastrophizing mindset that gets survivors of cults and other various things, all too familiar with catastrophizing. And that's not exclusive to cult survivors. Lots of people have that experience and can empathize. And yeah, so I started failing community college, which what's supposed to be really easy was really hard. When I failed out of community college and I didn't know what to do, I attempted suicide. I'm 4 years into recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction. I found my solution, and it wasn't enough to fix the things that were just going on in my life in the past and at that time. I took my car down to this boat dock, and it was a manual, and I got it right to the edge, over the edge of the boat dock. So I'm fully going down at a slant on the slope. And I roll up the windows, I lock the doors, I have my foot on the brake, but I put the car into neutral, release the e-brake, and I take my foot off the brake, and the car did not move. And I was confused. It just didn't move. There were no rocks or anything impeding the wheels from moving. I was on a slope that's meant to, like, for boats to get up and down. If you've seen those docks, like, they're a pretty aggressive slope, and my car did not move. And I sat there for like 5 minutes, just flabbergasted, why it wasn't working. And then I backed up, went over to a parking spot, and I cried. And I cried for an hour, because even wanting to kill myself, I failed. And I got scared and ran, and I joined the Navy. That was my other alternative, because that was 4 to 6 years guaranteed pay and this whole thing. And I approached it with the adaptive mindset of, like, this will be an adventure. I'm all for it. I'm excited, and I would justify it and everything. So I joined the Navy, and it had a lot of ups and downs. I was very much ready to get out before it was time to get out. Like anybody who was in the military is probably chuckling a little bit at that. I don't regret it because it was a really good experience for me. It re-emphasized a lot of the structure and foundation that rehab had put in me, like when to wake up, how to make your bed, what to eat, when to eat. Having that kind of structure, it frees your mind up from everything else. You can become, hyper focused.
Well, and I think also having been a child in a cult, even though structure was oppressive to you as a child in so many ways, it's actually all you knew was for everything to be defined and chosen for you. And if your sense of self isn't being encouraged, developed, and nurtured, then to have the relief of not having to choose for oneself, I think can feel a lot like home, whether it's good for us or not. It can feel like my sense of self is being defined for me, and there's a certain kind of relief when that's all you've ever known.
Right. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
it was just very freeing, and it's odd, but rehab and the military almost felt like a vacation because I didn't have to worry about money anymore. I just show up when they tell me, I do what they tell me, and everything will be taken care of. And it was, most people that may not have grown up poor. I mean, my family we were poor. We had donations from people given to us, food stamps. We were on that whole spectrum of needing financial assistance. And that was also given to me as a young child, was the fear of the financial insecurity. I do the Navy thing. It's really great. It's also really bad. Met some amazing people that I still talk to this day. I leave the Navy and I'm 25, 26, somewhere around there, mid to late 20s. And it was just like being 10 again, like leaving the cult. It was like all of a sudden I was free. I don't have this financial obligation. I can do whatever I want now. And at this point in time, I reconnected with AA. I had kind of taken a step back to a certain degree because I had 7 years or, whatever. And not that I thought that I didn't need AA or any 12-step program. I knew that I needed it, but I got overwhelmed with the social side of AA. There's a lot of cliques and things like that. And even in AA, I felt alone to a certain degree with those cliques of people. So I took a step back, but I leave the Navy. I reintroduced myself to AA through a friend on Facebook who reached out. He had just left rehab. He takes me to meetings at that point, and I get reacquainted with AA, and I meet all these amazing people in Portland. And I met a guy who is a really close friend of mine, and he's a manager at New Seasons, and he got me an interview with New Seasons. And I went to the interview and I got the job and I started working there, and it was like, oh my God, this is so much money, because 30% out of my paycheck wasn't taken out for this financial obligation, as well as the 20 to 30% for taxes. So I have all this money and I'm free. And I did that for like a year and a half. And at some point I had gotten a new sponsor, and we started going through a book called The Road Less Traveled, which fucking amazing book.
I'm Scott Peck. Yeah.
Yeah, Scott Peck. I'm not one to, be like, oh, this book will change your life and all that, I'm not into all that, but that book changed my life. The looking inward process in that book, and then also the kind of renegotiating thoughts and feelings that I had about myself, and the inner void started to become filled. For the first time in my life, reading that book and going through it with my sponsor at the time and doing some of the work that it kind of talks about and practicing these things, I remember my sponsor and we came to the realization that I didn't love myself. I loathed and hated myself because I was the problem, as exactly what had been taught to me as a child.
Yeah.
And so we started off by doing the most uncomfortable thing imaginable, which was, he said, your homework is, I want you to, every morning after you wake up and every night before you go to bed, to look in the mirror and say, I love you. And I'm like, oh my God, what kind of nut is this? Voodoo magic bullshit. You want me to throw some salt over my shoulder too, buddy? and I asked, well, when do I stop? And he said, when it becomes comfortable. And it took me a little over a month of doing that every day to where it became comfortable. And he's like, all right, now you're ready to start. And we started going through that book, and it changed my perspective on a lot of things in life. And we made a lot of progress through my years of working with him. Amazing work that I am, profoundly grateful for. But at one point, he was like, all right, it's time to graduate past new seasons. I'm like, what do you mean? He says, I have friends who have master's degrees in engineering, and you're smarter than they are. It's time to go back to college. And I'm like so hesitant. I'm flattered, but then also scared. But I failed. I failed community college. I don't want to go back to that. And it took a lot of talk, but eventually I went to Portland Community College again with the mindset of I love myself and having the tools necessary to deal with those fears, especially that inner talk, you're worthless. You can't do that. All those thoughts, they were still present. But then I had the tools to then repeat until they drowned out by saying, you are worthwhile. You are lovable. You can do this. And, those kind of like inner child talk.
All the things you wanted to hear when you were a little one. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a big one, being able to kind of imagine myself in my mind as an adult, as I was at that time, going up to the child me and basically being like, I'm going to be your father, the father that you wanted.
Yeah.
Yes, I know you are scared, and it's going to be okay. You are going to be okay. You're not going to die. And that was huge. So I had these tools, and I started going to this community college again, and I did well. And I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. I could do anything. Like anything now. It was like everything that was holding me back before that I needed drugs for. I didn't need the drugs anymore, but now I had the tools to fight those thoughts and those feelings and the fears and insecurities. And I could, just like our parents should tell us as kids, you can do anything you put your mind to. I was the one telling myself that. And I began to learn. I asked this sponsor, how do you study? And I started to develop those tools, which are what you're supposed to do at community college anyways. And I start doing that, and I get good grades. I got some A's, and that was really significant. And then it was like, okay, I'm ready to go to a university. So I put in my application for Portland State University. And the day I got the letter that I had been accepted, I cried. My grandpa cried. My mom cried. It was such a big deal because nobody in our family had ever gone to university. And I got in. And, Portland State accepts about 99% of the applicants. I didn't care, I got the chance to go. My safe haven from the abuse that my dad would put me through and all the feelings and fears, I would go to my room and I would play with Legos as a kid. That was safety to me of getting out of that world, focusing in on just this one thing, becoming hyper-focused, and Legos and drawing. I would draw, and I was really creative and talented for doing that kind of stuff. So just creating things. And my dad was a contractor who worked on houses. And when I would get in trouble with school, get suspended, I'd have to spend the day with him at his job, where we would drive around fixing people's houses and things like that. And it all kind of clicked, my first year of Portland State, where I'm like, I'm supposed to be an engineer. Like people had told me that I should be as a kid, because I would always fix things and build things out of Legos, and they were amazing. And
take freezers apart and put them back together.
and radios and other things. And so I started off studying electrical engineering. I'm like, okay, engineering, that's it. That's my solution. And I would spend like 18 hours a day, 7 days a week at school studying it. I'm putting in all this work and I was failing. And it was that fear of you're not good enough came right back up. And it was, okay, this one seems insurmountable. I can't, the inner child talk and all the affirmations that I was practicing, they weren't working as well. And I'm like, what do I do? I had a crisis of identity. Like, I thought I was supposed to be an engineer. This is what I've been told my whole life. And so I failed one class after putting in so much effort. And it was like, okay, I need to figure something else out. Like, okay, well, what's the other option? So I take this architecture class, and that very first day of class, the teacher's kind of going over this stuff, giving this presentation, and we're asking questions. And it was that I have arrived moment. My shoulders dropped, my jaw unclenched, my tongue dropped, and I understood what was being talked about. Like, I had questions that were relevant, and it just all made sense to me. And then I started to realize all the things that I thought that were pointing me towards engineering were actually pointing me towards architecture. Everybody in my life had told me to do engineering. They didn't know what engineers actually do or what architects really do. Right. Had they known, they would have pointed me in that direction, because then I realized, oh yeah, building things, understanding how they go together, and being able to draw sounds exactly like what my escape from my childhood was, as a child. Yeah. Drawing and fixing things, because I couldn't fix what was wrong with me, but I could fix this, and I could build this imaginary world where everything is okay, where I'm loved, and things like that. I do my research, and it requires a master's to become a licensed architect. And I switch over to that after my first year at PSU, and I do a rapid program where I took summer classes that I had to pay for out of pocket. I was working during the summers to pay for these classes, and I started getting straight A's. And as I got closer to that grad school application, which was in December of my senior year, I was talking to one of my professors. I'm like, should I apply to PSU? They have a grad program. And he says, I'll kill you if I see you walking these halls as a grad student. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I say, what should I do then? Should I apply to University of Oregon? He said, that should be your safety school. That should be the bare minimum. And I'm like, well, then what should I shoot for? He said, shoot for the stars. And I'm like, what are the stars? Like, I'm the only person in my family to ever make it this far in college. I have to figure everything out by myself. What is a dream? What is a future? And he mentions a few names of different schools, and I'm like, okay, you're high as shit, obviously. Like, the problem kid that hated school, that was going to end up in prison and was the dumb one, and all these things. What do you mean I should apply to Harvard and Yale and MIT and Stanford and the best schools in the world? What are you talking about, dude? I combated that fear of not being enough, and I did my applications, and I could only afford a couple. So I sent out one to University of Oregon as my safety school, and I applied to Harvard, and I applied to MIT. A couple weeks later, I hear back from U of O, and they're like, yep, we want you 40% scholarship. And I'm like, holy shit, I'm going to grad school. And my fear was at that point, what if I'm rejected by these other two schools? And it's like a couple months long process of waiting to hear back from them. And I go to work one day at an architecture firm that I had an internship with, and I sit down at my desk and I'm working on a project. I'm 30 minutes in, and my phone screen lights up, and it's a phone call, and it says Massachusetts. And both Harvard and MIT are both in Massachusetts, in Boston, or Cambridge, technically. Yeah. And I got goosebumps and an anxiety rush, because it occurs to me in that split second, they don't call you to let you know you suck, Yeah. And so I'm just like, oh my God, what is about to happen? And I answer the phone, and it's this guy who's a professor at MIT. He says, "Hey, I am so and so, and I just wanted to let you know that we just finished going over your application and we want to offer you admission to MIT for a Master's of Architecture. And we're going to give you a full ride scholarship."
Wow.
And I'm just like, I mean, I'm so confused and like overwhelmed with emotions. I sold the van that I'd been living in for 6 years. I hang out with friends and family, and the really hard work began. I moved 3,000 miles away by myself without knowing anybody, without ever having been there. What reality is this where good things, like not just good, but life changing, once, not even once in a lifetime type things happen to me, who my entire life has been pain and suffering and rejection and not being loved and all these different things. All of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but over time, it grew and changed, and my reality became this thing. And so, I mean, even right now we're talking, and I'm in my dorm room right now here in Cambridge. My second semester starts in a week and a half. I'm working on a project in Africa right now with a partner of mine at school as a volunteer project. We're designing and building a learning center for this village in Africa that then MIT is going to pay us to go there this summer. And I get to go do
Amazing.
the exact kind of work that I wanted to do, which is the humanitarian stuff. Like, making $1 million sounds great. I'd much rather be happy with myself and what I do and be of service to people. Basically, give people what was never given to me, kind of thing. That's my whole motivation. And it's just so surreal, and it's imposter syndrome. It's all of those things. Yeah, totally.
I mean, hearing the full arc of your story, it just really demonstrates that journey and where it can lead.
Yeah, and I realize, we can get caught up in these stories that we tell ourselves, and I think that was, my response from listening to my mom's podcast was like, okay, I wanted to point out one really significant part, I mean, hugely significant part of my story is that at some point in my 20s, everybody in my family started going to therapy. We all started getting our own forms of help in one way or another.
Yes.
And my brother is on that journey to some extent. My mom, as she expressed in her podcast, is. My dad found his own type of 12-step program, actually, of all things, and went to marriage counseling and saw a therapist individually and group therapy sessions and divorce therapy and all this stuff. And my dad came to realize that he was as much a victim of his own childhood as I was. And that was the really significant realization for me, was that this man that I hated, that I had planned out how I was going to murder, was a victim just like me. He started to correct his behaviors. He started to fill that void inside as best he could. And he changed as a person, just like I did. And that's why I was saying, like, at the beginning, he is a different person just as much as I am a different person. And because of that, because of going through these periods of growth and change and accepting the way things are, accepting the mistakes we've made in the past, not not shutting the door on them, but embracing them and trying to correct them. He and I have a really great relationship now. It's a different father-son relationship. And I have a great relationship with my brother. I have obviously a really great relationship with my mom. We can talk about pretty much anything and everything. And yeah, my parents got divorced, and that was, really hard because I was like 27 at the time, and that was really hard to go through, but I had the tools to deal with it. And the incredible thing was that was seemingly insurmountable for my dad. Like, he was so codependent, he needed my mom. And all of a sudden they're getting divorced. My dad's going to therapy, and this is when he's breaking down. I mean, every bit of him, he looked in the mirror and saw what he had done. And I had the incredible opportunity to be his friend, his only friend during that time.
How were you able to do that? I really think it's remarkable given what he put you through as a child. Say a little bit more about how you were able to go there and do that for him.
I mean, I think it's a combination of things, but inherently, I'm the type of person that I fix things. I help people. When I was 21, I was working at Home Depot, another cart pusher job. There was a baby that had been locked in a car in the summer, and there were people gathered around this car, and they were like frantically trying to, like they called the police and this whole thing. And it's like 90 degrees outside. So it's
Mm.
God knows how hot inside. And I just walk up and I'm like, what's going on? They're like, there's a baby in the car. And I look in, I see the baby there. I immediately break the window and get the baby out, take it inside, got it in front of the fan. The medics said that it saved the baby's life. That's just how I react to everything. I react and I save and I fix things. I put myself in danger if need be for the better of somebody else. So when my dad is going through his thing, yeah, I still hate him to a certain degree, but I'm able to look at myself and then to look at him. And it was almost like doing the inner child work on him. I could see the adult him who I hated and that I wanted to die. But then I saw the inner child in him that the adult him was ignoring. And nobody was showing that inner child any compassion or love.
Which is what you needed so much as a child. I mean, it really does come full circle in a way, right? Like to love the technically quote unquote unlovable.
Yeah.
Like you have the capacity to do that in a way that most people probably don't because you were that child.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. And I also think I romanticized to a certain degree the possibility of a future with a relationship with him. Like if I can
Sure.
accompany him on this journey and be there for him, maybe there's a future that resembles what I always wanted out of a father.
Is that what you have now?
I have a really good relationship. I do not have what I wish that I had because of my dad and brother having autism or being on the spectrum. They are not capable of expressing themselves in the same way that my mom and I do, through emotions, passion, tears, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there was a quote that I read in a book about a guy talking about his own relationship with his father. And when he realized that the relationship was never going to be exactly what he wanted. And it was to forgive him for what he's not and love him for what he is. And I try to practice that now. And I get to maintain for the most part, healthy relationship with my mom. I don't know how hopeful it is to have an idealistic relationship with my mom when we've been through the things that we have. Like our relationship will never be normal. My life will never be normal. And part of my journey now is coming to that conclusion that it's funny. As a kid, they would tell me, you're a special kid, and they'd say it in that way, like, boy, you're special. But now I'm kind of special. I'm kind of unique. And I don't want to phrase special in a way that gives the idea that I think I'm better than anybody else. It's not that. I have a unique experience growing up. I get to have a unique life now and unique relationships. And it's crazy. It really is, especially like then I get these opportunities, to very much where my mom kind of opened up and created this environment for people that may have been in the same kind of situation or a similar one. And through her podcast and her talking, they get to realize they're not alone in this world. And I wanted the focus of this episode to be more about, yeah, all this terrible shit happened, but that doesn't have to define a person, and you can get past it and become anything you want. There's nothing, truly nothing holding a person back. other than themselves.
I can't imagine a better way to wrap than that. I mean, that's really the heart of why it was a no-brainer when I sat down with you. I could feel that transformation in you from the first words you uttered. And, not even realizing that I was coming to the conversation with an expectation or a preconceived notion. We always have these implicit biases. And so I didn't even realize I had it until you started speaking and we started connecting. And I realized, wow, like we need stories like this so that we aren't carrying that bias
Right.
around. Like, once a problem child, always a problem
Right.
child,
Right.
or like whatever it is, or this person went through this terrible cultic experience, so therefore they're going to end up fill in the blank. Like that your story feels so important in this series because it's a demonstration of not just hope, because I feel like hope, even that word, gets hijacked in cultic environments. Like not even a sense of that idealism that you spoke about, but a sense of this is the real trajectory of a life when someone goes through the process of recovery, and this is what can one possibility of how it can turn out. And it is an inspired story, and not because of some magic, some special sauce that got sprinkled only on you, but because of the work that you did.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and like I said at the beginning, like it's weird to look back and to like talk about those things because just like my relationship with my dad and how we're different people, it's like I remember it and I remember the emotions, but I don't remember it. Like it's not me anymore. And it's so bizarre to, live my day-to-day life now where I wake up and I eat breakfast and then I go to MIT and I do this stuff, and to just be one of those students, it's so bizarre and surreal, and I definitely still experience, I mean, even my classmates who didn't have the same kind of experiences that I had growing up, everybody that I know has suffered from imposter syndrome, but the way we get through it is just by showing up one day at a time and just doing what we need to and being honest and healthy about it. I force myself to take a day off from schoolwork to have me time to recalibrate, to recenter myself, whatever it is. And most importantly, to give myself those words of like, it's okay. What you're feeling right now is okay. You're going to be okay. And just accepting that. And, that's everybody needs that. And if they don't have anybody in their life already to tell them that it's going to be okay, we are entirely capable of doing it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for being so open and transparent with your story, and for being willing to give us another vantage point on the experience that your mom shared, and to speak for yourself and to show up in this full expression of who you are now. It just really moves me.
Yeah, if this story touches one person's life, mission accomplished. And thank you for, not only having me, but providing this space for people. This is a really amazing kind of thing where it's like these kind of spaces exist, but a lot of them require in-person interaction. And what a cool opportunity to be able to provide this digital meeting place for people to be in their own comfort and their own safety and be wherever they are on their journey and get to, touch back in kind of thing. It's really cool. I imagine in 5-10 years time, you're going to get a lot of emails, if you don't already, from people saying that the podcast changed their life. So
It's kind of
thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's changed mine, and it's changing mine, and it's stories like this that are doing it. It really is incredibly transformative to sit down and have these long form conversations. And then I get to listen to them over and over again while I'm editing, and it just gets in that deeper bone deep, So thank you for showing up here today.
Of course.
It's so good to know you. Yeah. And I cannot wait to see what you do next.
Me either. What will he do next? I'm familiar with that.
And right, what will he do next? Oh, it has a whole different meaning now. That's incredible. I love that. Oh, I love that.
What will he do next? I'm so looking forward to finding out. This bittersweet story has transformed me. I want to thank both Christian and Trina for their incredible courage. What a fucking gift, y'all. To witness a child and a parent making room for one another. This, my friends, is what is possible when we stop pledging allegiance to familial and group identities and we forge honest connections based on self-trust and mutual respect. Parent, child, leader, follower, they're just labels, at times necessary. But what if we're not bound to the roles that we play? And what if cultic conditioning has it backwards? What if the things that happen to us stop defining us when we are willing to name them aloud in the presence of trusted witnesses? We recently had a group call in our After the Org support group, and one of my new and now forever friends, who so happens to also be a therapist, said it well. Trauma thrives when we are left alone with it. Yes. And I would add to that, we have to do our own work if we want to learn how to make room for other people's stories. I'm going to keep working at that, and I hope you will too. Oh, and one more thing, which may not need to be said, but I'm going to name it just in case. You heard Christian speaking about how his AA connections helped to positively alter the trajectory of his life forever. If you by chance had the thought, well, wait a hot minute, lady, just 2 episodes ago, you did an episode on 12-step culture. Yeah, I sure did. And I am so pleased that you noticed on both counts. Because I'm hoping to continually demonstrate this series is not about sorting the groups we occupy into tidy little categories. This is a cult and this isn't. No, it's about acknowledging that culty culture is every damn where. And that when we get caught up in labeling our groups as culty or not culty, we are much more likely to miss the dysfunctional dynamics that are operating right underneath our upturned noses. No individual, group, or human-created system is immune to this shit. And as soon as we think we're no longer susceptible, and trust me on this, I've done the legwork, look the fuck out. Okay, I'm going to stop swearing at you now and just say this one last thing. Let's keep connecting with each other, and let's celebrate when we get it right. And let's hold ourselves accountable when we don't. Thank you so much for tuning in, and please consider taking a moment to rate or review the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. Your listens and your shares are deeply appreciated, and I do not take the privilege of your attention lightly. So thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time.